The time is upon us, my dear friends, where I am finally going to see Nosferatu. The movie. Yes, 100%. The vampire movie. I like vampire movies. Well, okay, no, I tell a lie. I like some vampire movies. I have yet to see any of the Twilight Saga, and I am told that I need to. Not because they're good, but because they're bad. Anyway, I am finally going to go and see Nosferatu. Now, I really wanted to see this the day it came out, literally on the premiere. I really wanted to go and see it. But it was the festive season, and more important things took priority. Spending time with my loved ones, spending time with the people who appreciate me, and who I very much appreciate. And as much as I love to be there to give you first-hand access to experience these wonderful dynamics and review them along with those of you who get to see them, I have to say that those people take priority. There's always going to be a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is going to be people that I love, everything else. That's just the way I am as a human being, you know? Now, I have to say, I'm a big fan of Nosferatu. I love the original, the old black and white silent movie. I only saw it quite late on, and I absolutely fell in love with it. There's something romantic about the entire movie in and of itself. There's something romantic about the entire black and white era of movies. And a couple of Halloweens ago, I went through a process of like actually sitting down and watching all the old classic movies, the Bela Lugosi Dracula, the original Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I was a big fan of going through all of them, and for the vast majority of the time, I actually genuinely really enjoyed them, you know? But Nosferatu as a movie holds a special place in my heart because it was kind of like the first ever black and white movie that I ever saw. It was the first OG black and white movie I ever saw. And there is a place in my heart for that because I thought it was so beautiful, so romantic, so gothically romantic in its haunting dynamics. And then I found out about like its history. Now, as I understand it, and I may be wrong here, but as I understand it, what happened was they approached, the filmmakers approached the Bram Stoker estate and said, hey, we'd love to do a version of Dracula on cinematography, on the celluloid film. Now, in that day and age, cinema, or filming, generally speaking, was very new. It was a new era, new area, new form of entertainment and media. And much like a lot of new forms of media and entertainment, a lot of people thought it wasn't going to take off. It was a fad. It was new and interesting. No one will ever really take cinema seriously. Oh, God, no. So the Bram Stoker estate, as I understand it, basically turned around and said, no, not a chance. You are not getting the copyright for the Dracula. I don't know whether this is hearsay or whether it's true, but there was articles saying that the Bram Stoker estate didn't think that cinema could do Dracula justice, that cinema was ever going to really take off, that there was ever going to be any reason for people to enjoy movies more than they enjoy books. And there was one thing that I read many moons ago saying that the Bram Stoker estate basically just were like, no, not a chance. We are going to keep Dracula in its purest form, and it's never going to be anything but the book of Dracula. And if that's the case, then fair enough, you know, that's evidently how it went. Right? No, of course not. Of course not. There are a million Dracula movies. There are so many different Dracula movies. In fact, there are literally documentaries entirely on the franchise of Dracula movies. But anyway, that's a nice little tangent. In regards to the Nosferatu movie, the original, the filmmakers basically went, oh, okay. Well, that's a shame. Should we make it anyway? Let's make it anyway. And they made the entire movie. They changed it from Count Dracula to Count Orlok. They made the movie based as tight to the story of Dracula without being the story of Dracula, based on the day and age of copyright laws that existed. Now, we have to bear in mind the fact that there were obviously new sort of laws in regards to international laws that worked around copyright and stuff like that. For example, Bram Stoker himself was Irish, whereas the film company that did Nosferatu, the original Nosferatu, was German. And also, the film industry was all very new. And as we're finding out at the moment with regards to like internet laws and stuff like that, laws take a long time to pass and be created, whereas media, entertainment, and technology in general pushes at such an advanced rate that the laws struggle to keep up. We're definitely seeing a lot of that with AI at the moment, but in regards to the time, it was exactly the same. There weren't many laws around cinematography, around the development of celluloid film and what they could or could not film on, especially when you're talking about different countries in that day and age. So there were various different loopholes that they got away with because, of course, nobody really questioned it at the time. In fact, I'm probably, I'm going to take a complete guess that many of the laws that came out around movies, around cinematography, copyright laws in regards to books and what have you, came about because of plagiaristic infringements like Nosferatu itself. That being said, there were certain elements of it that were definitely taken off the filmmaker's own back. And again, this isn't like me doing a direct study on Nosferatu as a whole. This is me just speculating based on my own knowledge. Dracula himself started as this old hideous creature and then became a beauteous individual. Nosferatu was just a hideous creature. I seem to remember there being rumor about the fact that the fangs, the canine fangs that Dracula has, were copyrighted, and that's the reason why Nosferatu has his fangs at the front of his mouth like a rodent, and his rodent-esque elements are definitely prominent within the original Nosferatu. So yeah, there's a whole load of things within the original Nosferatu and iterations of Nosferatu thereafter, including like the roleplay games with Vampire the Masquerade and stuff like that, that I'm genuinely really looking forward to seeing how this new movie compares to all I know about the lore and the history of Nosferatu, both as a fantasy character of the supernatural, and from the original movies. Now, many of you will remember I did a live reaction to the trailer of the movie with all of you. I sat here and you saw my genuine reactions as I witnessed this whole thing. Now, at the time, I didn't know who was in it. I didn't know who was directing it. I didn't know anything about it. I just saw, ooh, Nosferatu trailer. Let's have a look. And many of you who will have seen that will remember the fact that I was very apprehensive. I was very... I thought it looked really cool. I thought it was really atmospheric, and they captured a lot of the atmosphere and what have you. But there was a fear in me that they may encroach over into too much cheesiness. Like the old horror movies, especially like the Hammer horror movies of yonder days and what have you, there was an element of cheese with all of their horror. And I was really worried with some of the things, some of the imagery that I saw, that it may fall over into cheesiness. However, I have been told by people that have seen it, that have not spoiled it for me, that they do not have any of that at all, that it's actually really well executed. The only things I know, other than the trailer, the only things that I know about the new movie is that Bill Skarsgård talked about the fact that it was one of the most harrowing experiences he has ever had playing the Nosferatu character, Count Orlok, that it's absolutely fantastic, and that there is a mustache in it. That was leaked to me. I have avoided all information about it. Obviously, that's quite hard because I'm a couple of weeks into it now, but I've avoided as much as I possibly can because I want to go with as unmarred an experience as possible, you know? So, a mustache, Bill Skarsgård's potential therapy, and the fact that everyone keeps telling me is really, really good. Everyone keeps telling me that if I like the original, I'm going to really enjoy this one. So I'm looking forward to it, and I've been keen to get onto it and go and see it. But I've not been able to up until tonight. So tonight I am going to go and see Nosferatu. Now, normally I would dress up for the occasion. I'd be dressing up all vampiresque, having the frills, all of the gloriousness. However, at the moment, it is like -2 degrees where I live, -2 degrees C. Celsius where I live, and I point blank refuse to put my heating on any more than twice a day because I straight up can't afford it, for one, and two, I'm very stubborn about the fact that I shouldn't have to put my heating on more than twice a day. And yet, right now, where my entire genitalia is folding itself up and putting it inside my body for sheer warmth, I am in a position where the concept of getting out of these clothes and into something frilly that will not be as warm as this outfit is genuinely abhorrent to me. So as much as I would normally dress up to go and see the cinema thing so that I can have a nice atmospheric dynamic of visiting the cinema, watching the movie, and then coming back and retelling the tale to all of you, that ain't gonna happen this time. All right, I did it for Beetlejuice. I didn't do it for The Crow because fuck that noise, but I did it for Beetlejuice. I was prepared to do it for this one, and yeah, that ain't gonna happen. That ain't gonna happen. So you're just gonna have to deal with that, I'm afraid, this time, you know. In the meantime, I'm gonna jump in the car, go pick up my little brother, and we're gonna go and see the movie, which I'm genuinely very excited to go and see. I'll let you know how it goes. Right, I've just walked in and I need to get myself settled and then we'll get back to this. But all I wanted to say was fucking wow. Okay, that's better. I'm now a little more comfortable, lit some candles for atmosphere, and ready to get into it. As per usual, friends, we are going to do a spoiler-free section, and then we will do a spoiler-full section, so that people who haven't seen the movie yet, who want to see the movie, have the ability to get the general gist of what kind of review that I'm going to be giving it, without actually getting any spoilers. Then, for you people who either A, don't care enough to see it, or B, are really enthusiastic about having seen it, then you can come and nerd out with me in the entire spoiler section. Okay? A few things to note before we begin. I have written a whole load of notes. In fact, to be honest with you, I've pretty much written an entire novel myself because I have a lot to say. But before we begin, all right, it needs to be said that the original movie, the original black and white, in fact, it was sepia, the original sepia Nosferatu movie that was a silent movie back in the day was an hour and 20 minutes long. So the source material for this movie was an hour and 20 minutes long, and because it was a silent movie, a good quarter to a third of that movie was taken up with action, then screen of text explaining the dialogue. So realistically speaking, without all of the dialogue slides, it was probably more about 50 minutes worth of a movie. The original is basically a bare skeleton of an actual storyline, you know? And also, as previously mentioned, they made the original movie, the 1922 movie, without the permission of the Bram Stoker estate. So they had to change a fair amount of it in order to get away with telling the story without getting in trouble. Okay? And finally, before we get into the spoiler-free section, the word Nosferatu predates all of the movies. The word Nosferatu is an old Greek word. I'm not going to say what it means because I don't want to spoil it for people. The meaning of the word Nosferatu does actually have connotations within the movie. So I don't want to say what it means, but I can tell you that it originates in ye olde Greek and then was used in like Romania and Transylvania for similar but slightly different, more supernaturally purposes. Okay? Okay. Into the spoiler-free section. So this entire section, we'll be talking about the movie without giving away any of the plot points, without giving away any of the details of the movie, just talking about the generic movie as a whole, okay? In regards to cinematography, it was a work of art, like an absolute masterpiece of a work of art. It built atmosphere in such a phenomenal way. For starters, the soundtrack itself was quite subtle for a hell of a lot of the movie, but it was so haunting. It was constantly there, but just haunting. Whoever it was that was the artistic director in regards to sound, the sound director, they had a genuinely fantastic way of knowing where to place silence. And that in itself is an art form. That in itself is fantastic, to know when to make no sound. Just brilliant. The soundscape was just really good. And as I mentioned, the cinematography in regards to like the artistic aesthetics and what have you were some of the most artistic I have ever seen, and really played into the gothic aesthetics. And I don't mean like new age gothic, The Crow typo negative. I mean the old school dark aesthetic, very dark, very melancholic. The weather was always overcast. There was always something dark and mysterious going on. It very much played into the architecture and the feeling of gothicness without, you know, my kind of fashion sense. And then to take that, where the atmosphere was completely amazingly sculpted into this artistic piece of work, you then add phenomenal performers, absolutely sensational acting across the board, even from Bill Skarsgård. And that says a lot from me, because I went to see the Crow remake, and let's just say Bill had a lot to make up for in my eyes. So it was absolutely fantastic, genuinely really good. I was quite taken by a lot of it. And I think one of the things that really got me was, how do I say this without giving too much away? Elements of the acting that should have appeared as potentially a little silly or a little out of place weren't. They came across as haunting. There are lots of things, especially in this day and age of the internet, where you look at something on a screen and you're like, ha, how preposterous. This is a completely unrealistic dynamic. How ridiculous this is. And yet, because of the way that they sculpted the scenes within the movie itself, they didn't seem out of place. In fact, if anything, they felt really unnerving. Oh, I got a shiver. It was fantastic. Just really good. There were also some phenomenal moments that really paid homage to the source material. Not just the source material of Nosferatu, the movie, the 1922 old sepia one, but also like the story of Dracula, which is what Nosferatu was based on. And it paid homage to those things in a really stylistic way. There were elements where I noticed, being a nerd for the original movie, I noticed these things where the elements just came in, and because I clocked them, it just brought a little smile to my face. I was just like, oh, there it is. There's the homage to the original movie. There, I see it, you cheeky devils. It was cool. It was really cool. And of course, I did mention, if any of you saw my reaction to the trailer itself, I mentioned that I was worried about the cheesiness element, about whether they had gone a step too far with the cheesiness of historical styles of horror and then horror in this new dynamic. And I have to say, as I went into the cinema and sat down with my popcorn and my drink, I was worried about that. I was genuinely worried that it was still going to be a bit too cheesy. Even though loads of people said it was really good, I worried that it was going to step over the line for me and that it was going to feel too cheesy. And I have to say, there were a couple of points in it which were really cheesy, but they didn't feel out of place. Like, the way that I viewed them was they weren't out of place, but in my personal opinion, the movie could have been perfectly okay without those elements. Like, those points, that I remember two specific moments where I was like, that, like, it's there, it's cheesy, it doesn't feel out of place, I understand why it's there, but the movie didn't need them. Or at least in my opinion, obviously, me as a complete randomer on the internet, it didn't need those elements. Now, since having seen the movie, I have subsequently gone online and had a look at what other people thought of the movie. And there's a lot of criticism. There is a lot of criticism around certain dynamics and certain aesthetic choices they made within the movie. But as somebody who nerds out over all of this stuff, I have to say, I think that is a little unfair. You can tell, or at least I can tell, that there was a lot of passion brought into this project. A hell of a lot of passion that was brought into it. Not only passion for the original source materials, Nosferatu, Dracula, etc., but also passion for history, to base the source material within historical accuracy, within a historical light, as it were. And I think that worked really well. I think the way they did it was very tactical. And I'll talk about it more in the spoiler section because I don't want to give the game away for you people who don't want the spoilers. But I thought it was very interesting the way that they sculpted those elements into it. And yeah, I think they did a good job. I think they did a really good job on that, you know? However, I do have to say, I'm surprised that they certified it as a 15. Like, I wouldn't push it into being an 18 myself, but there were certain elements within the movie itself that normally, in my experience, would have pushed it straight into being in the 18 category. So I was surprised at that. Not upset about it, but I was certainly surprised at it. Okay, that is the spoiler-free section. I kind of don't want to go further into any more of that because if I do, then I'm going to get into details and I don't want to do that. So let's take that as the spoiler-free section, and you people who want spoiler-free like review, that's it. Like, it was great, it was wonderful, I appreciate it. Skip this next section and go straight to the overall review at the end, all right? Don't worry, there'll be tags in the little play bar below, all right? Because the next section, I am going to get real nerdy while I completely go into the nitty-gritty of the movie itself. Okay? So, this is where I get to be a proper nerd and say, what a film! What a phenomenal film. Genuinely, oh, I loved it. Not the most amazing film I have ever seen in my entire life, but still a sensational masterpiece of work, you know? You could really, really tell that it was a passion project, that the people involved, especially like the creative directors and the writers and what have you, you could tell that A, they'd done their research, and B, they had really, really cared about the source material and the work that they were doing on this project, you know? Because it really leans into the source material, the local folklore of the area, and history itself. So you can tell that they've done their research. You can tell that they have gone through all the nitty-gritty details of the source material, of local folklore, of historical accuracy. You can tell all of these elements, and we'll get into that in a little while. I've got my million billion notes. We'll get into that. Don't worry, okay? But before we do that, I wanted to talk first about the things that I didn't like about the movie, because I think it's important to start there and then talk about all the stuff that I really did like, okay? First and foremost, they showed him too early. In my personal opinion, they showed the creature that is Nosferatu far too early in the movie. It was a split second. And I understand why they did it, where they did it. Like, it makes sense, or certainly makes sense later on in the movie when you start to learn a bit more about the storyline and what have you. But that split second was enough for me to lose all fear and dread about the creature that is Nosferatu, you know? Like, one of the things that makes the original Alien movie such a fantastic masterpiece is you never fully see the creature itself, even though you know what it looks like. Because by the time, especially nowadays, by the time you actually get to see the movie itself, everyone knows what a xenomorph looks like. But it's the fact that you don't see it that builds that dread, that builds that fear. And in my personal opinion, the moment, that split second where you see him, I was like, cool, now I know what it looks like. There's no fear now. I know that this is the monster. Cool, fair enough. Like, great. Didn't take away any of the suspense or anything like that, but it did take away that impending fear for me. And then, like I said in the spoiler-free section, there were a couple of bits that I mentioned, the cheesy bits, and those couple of bits, like, for example, the hand shadow. You see it in the trailer, the hand shadow that stretches out over the town. That, it wasn't like cheesy to the point where it was out of place, but it did feel like not off. It pulled me out of the immersion, is what it did. It pulled me out of the point where I was at. I was like, okay, right, okay, yeah, this is this bit, as opposed to being there in the moment like I was for the vast majority of the film. The vast majority of it, I was there, I was waiting, I was biding my time and being like, oh my god, oh, how exciting. And then those bits, I was just like, okay, yeah, I see what you're doing here. You're paying homage to the original movie. I understand why it's there, but is it necessary? Is it needed? Did it need to be there? I mean, it was only a couple of seconds, but those couple of seconds managed to drag me fully out of the immersion of the movie, so it just honestly didn't feel necessary to me. Okay, Now that's out of the way, let's talk about the atmosphere. Oh, the atmosphere. There was so much of the movie that was purposefully off about it. And what I mean by that is like hearing footsteps, and then the footsteps prematurely finish, even though they shouldn't have. There was a blurring of the lines between reality and a dream or trance-like state that this movie did in such an interesting and beautiful way that really lent itself to this haunting atmosphere, this really not fearful, not scary, but just foreboding atmosphere. And there was also a really interesting element and a question around the power of belief, which I found quite fascinating. Like, I love the way that they blurred the lines between science and belief, between logic and faith. Like, there were some people who were faithful who were completely saved and impervious to the foreboding dread that is this monster, but others who were very faithful who were completely at its mercy. I loved how learned men, people who you would turn to in situations like this, didn't have the answers. All they could do was speculate based on what little tidbits of knowledge that they had. Like, innocents died. Collateral damage was rife. And there was no happily ever after. If anything, I think that's one of the things that makes this movie so unbelievably beautiful. And one of the key things that really stood out for me is, unlike the source material of Nosferatu and Dracula, it wasn't love that bound the monster to the maiden. It was something more primal. Not lust, not even lust, something more base, an instinct that came out. And I love that because it was as if the beast, the monster known as Nosferatu, was completely incapable of experiencing something as pure as love. It made him somehow more hideous, more monstrous than both the old depiction of Nosferatu and any depiction of Dracula. Honestly, that in itself was just exquisite. Now, let's talk about the mustache, shall we? Let's talk about the mustache. The controversial dynamic of Nosferatu having a mustache. It's powerful. It is powerful. And it is a powerful mustache within the dynamic. Initially, I have to say, I wasn't expecting it. People had mentioned about a mustache beforehand, like a little spoiler that slipped out when I was talking about going to see it in stream, but I didn't know what to expect with it. Okay, now this is the original image of Nosferatu. This is the depiction that most people know of Nosferatu. And I think I was expecting something similar to that. However, despite initially being thrown by it and not being sure about it, as the movie went on, my mind cast itself to the inspirations that sculpted this creature. We have Vlad the Impaler, one of the inspirations for Dracula himself. We have Dracula, the Count Dracula, and in the book of Count Dracula, in the book of Dracula, Dracula has a mustache. He has a long white mustache. That's how it is described in the book. So everyone thinks about like Bela Lugosi, that kind of dynamic. Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee, those are kind of like the iconic images that people associate with Dracula. However, in the book, that's not what he looks like. He has a long white mustache, or certainly at the beginning of the book, he has a long white mustache. At the end of the book, he has a pointed beard that is speckled with specks of grey, if I remember correctly. So the origins, like the characters that inspired the creature of Dracula, which in turn inspired Nosferatu and this creature that we are talking about today, all had facial hair. They all had mustaches, you know? And on top of all of that, we have to look at historical accuracy. I mentioned it briefly before, but Dracula was a Transylvanian lord. Count Orlok is supposed to be a Transylvanian lord. And that is really depicted within this because in that day and age, they would have had big mustaches. They would have had big old mustaches on their faces, like Transylvanian lords did. This is where the historical accuracy really comes in here. His whole demeanor, his accent, the way he carried himself was that of a Transylvanian lord. And honestly, those three elements, the Nosferatu, the Dracula, and the historical accuracy, are really how I view this entire movie. They are the three angles that I have attacked this entire movie from, and I think that is the reason why I love it so much. So let's go through it together, shall we? Let's start with Nosferatu. Let's start with the original 1992 Nosferatu, the silent movie, okay? If that silent movie was a skeleton of a concept, then this movie is the flesh of it, the meat around the skeleton. It really, really takes that original story, that concept, and then fleshes it out, makes the monster more monstrous, gives depth to the characters and their relation to the story as a whole. There are so many little homages in the movie itself to the original, and none of them feel out of place. Apart from the hand across the town, none of the others really feel out of place. It feels foreboding. It feels haunting. And it was amazing to see tricks of the light and cinematography that was used back 100 years ago being used today to the same effect. And the vast majority of them were also very subtly executed. So it didn't stand out as a homage. It's only if you know the source material pretty well that you know that that is a homage to it. So like I said, just amazing the way that techniques that were used 100 years ago can still be used now to the same effect. Then we look at Dracula. Now, the original Nosferatu movie, as previously mentioned, was the story of Dracula without the permission from the Bram Stoker estate. Okay, so it makes sense that the storyline of this movie follows the same sort of plot, you know? However, I genuinely thought that they put a really fascinating spin on the original story. The story has been told literally for over 100 years, and yet this was the first time where I was like, ooh, that's a really interesting take on this story. So many elements of it were following the plot, but viewed from a very different perspective. And that really breathed life, in my personal opinion, that really breathed life into this whole concept, the whole story, the whole plot, the tale as old as time. And whereas you have Dracula as the devil in a charming body, Nosferatu really, really personifies the monster that he is meant to be. Underneath the charming smile and the beautiful accent of Dracula, there is meant to be this monster, and all that Nosferatu is that monster. And honestly, continuing that concept, the spin on the archetypes that we are so used to was continued on in regards to all of the characterization as well. The villain, being Nosferatu himself, was taken in a very different perspective. The servant was far more insidious in nature and maniacal almost. It didn't seem like a stooge servant that we are so used to, this Igor-style character. It was genuinely a perversion of humanity that beset them. And then, of course, you have the innocent young man who is sent as the sacrifice to the monster in the Carpathian Mountains. And the love interest as well was a really unique twist, because in the past, she has always been a pure, innocent creature. And in this movie, she isn't. She is a woman. A woman much like any other, and yet has a basis and an origin story as to why she has the eye of this monster in such a unique way, such a way that I was not expecting at all. And the way that it is told is, in my personal opinion, such a beautiful revelation of it, you know? So that's Nosferatu, and that is Dracula, and those are the elements that played into this movie. But the thing that I think a lot of people weren't sure about, and the thing that really throws them when viewing this movie, is the historical accuracy. Obviously, you've got the moustache. He was a Transylvanian lord. He has the moustache, but he's also stocky. He's a stocky man. The Nosferatu we're used to is a lithe, sinewy creature, whereas this man isn't. He's barrel-chested, broad of shoulder, big moustache, and yet hideous, stealthy and slight, unnervingly there. And when you get to see him later on in the movie, you really get to see the origins of the word Nosferatu. The word Nosferatu is an old Greek word, and potentially an ancient Greek word, meaning disease bringer. And as mentioned, it goes on to mean plague bearer, and was used by the Romanian and Transylvanian peoples in a lot of their folklores to talk about the origins of plagues and diseases. Anytime that a disease infected a village or a town, it was believed that it was caused by a single entity, by a single creature known as the Nosferatu. I've done a lot of research into the origins of vampires, and I have a whole video on that on another channel, but the whole dynamic, a lot of what I see in Nosferatu in this movie really stems back to the original views of what vampires were like. The vampires, the Nosferatus, these wraith-like creatures that would be there and infect entire villages, infect entire towns and bring everything to ruin. And you see a lot of that in this movie, especially in the aesthetics of Nosferatu. He is a hideous creature. He is vile to gaze upon, and it is so hideous to behold because he is disease bringer. He is disease ridden. He is plague infected, and he brings the disease and the plague to the town. He was not a vampire or a vampire in the way that we understand vampires to be today. Forget your Twilight, forget your Interview with a Vampire, forget your I don't even know, True Blood. Just forget all of that, because those are modern depictions of vampires. The vampire that we see in Nosferatu is far more along the lines of the traditional folklore views of vampires. He was something more than a bloodsucker. He was a catastrophe in and of himself. Everywhere he went, he brought ruin. And that was how they viewed vampires in ye olde times. And then we come to the finale, and we go full circle all the way back to the 1922 silent movie of Nosferatu. We have the hand, the shadow of the hand, approaching the fair maiden as she waits for the monster. And in the original movie, Nosferatu cannot resist the beauty of the young lady, and therefore gets caught out by the sunrise. I think that the way that they interpreted that scene in this movie, the way that they portrayed that lack of resistance on part of Nosferatu, was honestly pretty inspired. I don't think I ever expected it, but as soon as it happened, it all made sense. It just made sense. And I was honestly pretty blown away by it. I was pretty blown away by it. There was a lot of ways that they could have killed Nosferatu. They could have killed the vampire. They had loads of ideas about how to go about doing it. And I really liked the way that throughout the entire movie, no one really knew what would work. They just kind of thought that these things would work. And yet the way that it happened was the way that it transpired in the 1922 movie. And it was amazing. It was genuinely amazing. I thought it was fantastic, the way that they executed that. So yeah. And now the spoilers are done. That is the spoiler section. That is me, and I could nerd out about this for a really long time. Trust me, I've been chatting to my little brother who I went with. I've been chatting to my housemate Chunk. I've been chatting to a whole load of people because I fucking love this. I can nerd out about this for a long time because I know the folklore, because I know the origins of all of the vampire lore, as it were, but then I also know the original movie and Dracula. I know all of these things, so I can nerd out about this for a really long time. However, let's wind it back in and let me give my final thoughts about this, because I don't have a 3-hour lecture to be able to give you. Or I certainly shouldn't, at least, you know? My overall thoughts are, it was phenomenal. It was so unbelievably artistic. The aesthetics were exquisite. The soundtrack and the use of music and silence in it was absolutely fantastic. Just mind-blowingly good. The whole atmosphere was haunting and foreboding, and yet wasn't like, there was no jump scares. There was no scariness, you know, in the way that we know horror to be today. It was just this constant state of being unnerved. And I love that. I love that about it. The attention to detail of telling the original story within a historically accurate format, whilst also taking into account original folklore of the area and like such creatures, was honestly just inspired. It was just fantastic. And I think that they executed it phenomenally well. There were so many parts of it, because I know so much of the origins, because I know so much about the original movie, I know so much about the Dracula story, and I know so much about the myth of vampires. There were so many parts of it where I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's such an... I'm not sure about that. Oh, no, now that makes sense. There was so many elements that I was expecting to go wrong and didn't. There were so many parts of it that I was genuinely unsure about and yet made sense. It was honestly one of the most unique cinema experiences I think I've ever had. And I am so glad that I had it. Like, just, yeah, mwah, absolutely fantastic. So, yeah, I appreciate you being along for that, friends. If you have seen it, then please let me know in the comments. And do the whole like and subscribe thing, because in fact, no, hold on, let's go full character here. All right, let's go full character. Okay, you should like and subscribe. That's my foreboding Transylvanian lord noble character. So now that I've done that impression, you obviously desperately need to press that cheeky little thumbs up button, and if you don't already subscribe, then you should subscribe. I mean, you've got all the way through this passion of mine, you may as well click that cheeky little subscribe button, you know? And I'm not going to go through all the places you can find me. Look, they're there. These are the places that you can find me. I've already talked too much as it is. If you want to talk some more, find me on one of these. Yeah, they'll be fine, all right? I was blown away by this. I am so unbelievably thankful to have gone and seen it. And I'm gutted that I didn't do it earlier. I would have liked to have seen it much earlier on. Although saying that, if I had seen it much earlier on, I feel like the moustache would have thrown me even more. I feel like the spoiler of the moustache, having that spoiler definitely meant that I viewed it as an analytical thing as opposed to a problem thing. So thanks to my Twitch community for accidentally spoiling that for me. Because, yeah, I feel like that was actually a boon in my way. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, friends, I will be back with more videos for you here on Thirst and Vanity. And until then, you beautiful beings, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Because if I wouldn't do it, it'll fucking kill you. You should like and subscribe. I love it.